Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
Thanks for joining us for Your Legislators. I'm Fred Martino. Good to be with you, and we're very pleased to have with us from Santa Fe today Representative Angelica Rubio. It is her first legislative session. Representative, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So how are things going in Santa Fe? Tell us about this, your first time in a legislative session as you start your role as a representative for the state of New Mexico.
So far, the first 30 days have been very exciting and also a huge learning curve. I feel like I learn something every half hour.
I bet. And there has been a lot of activity this week. Of course, the big role of the legislature is to pass a budget. And this year, this is particularly difficult because Governor Martinez has said that she will not accept new taxes. And we should mention that we've invited Governor Martinez to join us on this program and haven't heard back yet. So we'll preface everything in the show by saying that. This week, Democrats did introduce some ideas for some new revenue, taxing all internet sales. As you know, right now, we don't tax internet sales for companies that don't have a physical presence in New Mexico, like many states, raising a permit fee on heavy trucks coming through the state, closing a loophole that benefits nonprofit hospitals, and increasing the tax on vehicle purchases from 3 to 4%. So it would still be much less than the gross receipts tax on many other items. But these four things are predicted, if they were to pass, to raise quite a bit of money. Some reports say $200 million a year in ongoing revenue. What do you make of these proposals by the Democrats in Santa Fe?
I feel that this is a good place to begin, considering that the governor has not wanted to talk about raising taxes. However, I feel that personally I feel that these four things that we're looking at to raise revenue is important because having been here early on in the session and participating in a session within the session and seeing so many of our public schools directly impacted, I do not want to have to I will not be voting to make any further cuts specifically to public schools. And so I feel like this is a very good trade-off with the governor and something that I think she should really consider.
What is your sense in Santa Fe about negotiations with the governor? Of course, I'm sure no one up there wants to pass a bunch of measures, including new revenue, and then simply have them vetoed.
Right. I'm unclear as to what's happening in terms of the negotiations. What I do know is that there are some items here that specifically the online taxing that might be something she'd consider, but I can't really speak for her. And so my hope is that this package will be something that she'll consider. At the end of the day, we are trying to figure out the best way to move forward, and continue to cut services and our public schools is not the way to go. And I feel that this is the right move at this point in time.
Okay, I want to ask you about another specific proposal. Senator John Arthur Smith, as you know, has proposed a 10-cent a gallon increase in the state gasoline tax. We have one of the lowest gas taxes in the country, and it hasn't been increased in many, many years to keep up with the inflationary cost of roads and other infrastructure. What do you make of this?
I mean, I'm open to having that conversation. It hasn't reached the House yet, but I know that it's something that we have been talking about for a while now. I know that as somebody who represents a district in southern New Mexico, a district that's already that's surrounded by rural communities, I know that there might be some pushback on that. I also believe that we need to all pay our fair share, and I'm willing to hear the merits of what Senator Smith is proposing once that hits the floor here in the House.
So let me ask you about that as a broader principle. You used the term fair share there. Do you think that this would be a wise thing on a broad level for the legislature and the governor to get together and basically say that in terms of tax policy overall, we do need to look at inflation, and for that matter, employee salaries, looking at inflation, keeping up with what, even in the best of times, is about a 2% a year increase in costs?
I think that we definitely have to consider looking into our tax policy. I recently introduced a bill to increase our working families tax credit from 10% to 20%, and we would pay for that by reducing the capital gains, actually repealing the capital gains tax that was brought forth to us prior to 2003 by Governor Richardson. I think that there are a number of things that we can do within tax policy that and modernize and reforming that would make a big difference in the way that we function as a government, but also making sure that going back to everybody paying their fair share.
Okay, I want to ask you about another particular proposal for tax increases: alcohol and tobacco taxes. Polls show these are very popular with the public, and as you know, public policy experts say that this is the way to go for states and for the federal government, because these substances pass enormous costs on to government, health and other issues, law enforcement, in the case of alcohol in particular. What are your thoughts on this?
They're policies that I would support, specifically the alcohol tax. I know that right now all of us, regardless of whether or not we partake in alcohol consumption, are already paying a dollar amount per year. And I think that by putting out this, by instituting this alcohol tax, those who partake in the consumption of alcohol will be the ones that would pay the tax, and everybody else who does not will no longer have to pay for something that they don't necessarily contribute to.
Okay, I want to ask you about something else that, of course, is one of the biggest headline grabbers during the legislature and even before the legislative session, and that is a proposal to legalize, tax, and regulate cannabis. Again, polls show this is very popular in the state. More than 60% of folks polled recently said, let's do this. On the federal level, it's about the same. About 60% of folks saying this is a good idea. And many states, including our neighbors in Colorado, have done this. What do you think?
I agree. I think that we as a state are way behind on instituting this legalization, and I think that we're losing out on millions of dollars that could greatly benefit so much of our state, and being able to take back to our communities, and being able to really put New Mexico in a place where it can actually compete with the rest of the country.
As you know, there is no indication, though, that if this were to pass, that it would escape Governor Martinez's veto pen. So, is it important, in your view, for the legislature to instead pass a bill that takes this directly to the voters, and I believe that would be in 2018?
Yeah, so I think that that's a very important question, and this is something that I ask my constituents to really consider, and those who are listening, is that so much of what we're proposing here at the legislature, at the end of the day, the governor has to sign on to it, and we definitely have to put as much pressure on her as possible. And because that's the situation, it's important to also consider that we also have a right for a constitutional amendment, and taking that specifically to voters. And if that were to occur, I think that an overwhelming number of people within our state would support that.
Is there also another thought here that by taking it directly to the voters, it provides a powerful voice to Washington, D.C., because, of course, even if this were to pass, state law would conflict with federal law?
Right, and I think that there's a wave across the country of the legalization of marijuana that at the federal level, you would have to really consider that. And I realize that the situation that's happening at the national level in terms of public policy, some people are concerned of just whether or not states' issues will be taken into consideration. However, I think that by sending this to the voters, and by seeing the amount of support that this issue sees throughout the country, there's absolutely no way that the federal government or the national government should not be able to follow through with what the states are requesting.
As you know, there's another proposal on the table this year once again. The legislature previously overwhelmingly and in a bipartisan fashion passed a bill allowing farmers to grow hemp, but the governor vetoed that bill. Once again, this is before the legislature. Any better chances, do you think, this time around with new legislation?
You know, I having just been in the legislature for the first 30 days, I still remain hopeful, and I know that there are obstacles along the way in terms of what we can do as a legislature versus what might occur in terms of a veto pen at the end of the session. And so I'm hopeful that those across the state will realize, specifically those paying attention to what's happening here in Santa Fe, that every single day we're working really hard to figure out how to put our state back on track, and that so much pressure needs to be put on the executive to make sure that that they're open to some of these ideas, and that we can't no longer continue to play politics on the backs of public schools and the public services that are continuing to be cut all across the board.
Another economic issue for many people across the state of New Mexico. I know that you were a big advocate for increasing the minimum wage in the state during your campaign. And as you know, there are a number of proposals to do that in the legislature. Give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I definitely believe that we should be increasing the minimum wage here in Las Cruces, but in the state of New Mexico. It is an issue that there's a variety of bills that have been proposed. I personally believe that we should be providing fair wages all across the board, and some have determined that that's $15. I know that there's another bill for 10/10 by 2020. And I think the fact that we are open to having this discussion and this conversation, and perhaps that it's something that the governor would be willing to sign and take that into effect is encouraging to me. I know that there's been discussions around whether or not the business community would support that, and I've actually been encouraged to hear some of the willingness to move our minimum wage up higher than what I would have expected in terms of the conversations that have been taking place. So if anything, I think this is definitely something we should consider. It puts money back into local communities, and so I definitely support an increase in the minimum wage.
Of course, as you know, I think one bill would only increase the minimum wage to $8.45 an hour, but as you said, there are other bills that go as high as $15 an hour. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on this in terms of how much the wage should be increased? And of course, there's another important issue, as you know, whether or not the legislation includes inflationary increases over time so that the legislature doesn't have to constantly revisit this issue. Santa Fe, as you know, has this in their legislation so that they don't have to revisit it. Over time, it increases with inflation.
Right, and I, as somebody who has led the minimum wage campaign in Las Cruces and who has supported fair wages throughout my professional career, I would love to see something be passed that is $15. That is something that I believe we must have in order to be able to lift so many of our communities out of poverty. I also recognize that that I have to also compromise in terms of other regions around the state, and so I think what I'm encouraged to hear, what I'm encouraged about is the fact that if we don't get to $15, I know that we will get closer to $10, and that's what at least that's what my feelings are, that we will be able to make it closer to that. I will want to make sure that anything that we pass does have something in there that says that it will go up with cost of that it'll go up with our cost of living, but also wanting to make sure that local communities are not directly impacted as well, because I know that sometimes we leave those types of we make it difficult for municipalities to be able to decide on issues like that as well.
Of course, just like with marijuana, there's no indication that the governor would allow a $10 an hour minimum wage to escape her veto pen. So again, in your view, should the legislature look at a bill where folks would vote on this as a constitutional amendment?
You know, I was elected to be bold and to make the right decisions for our communities, and I think that the people who are here in the legislature have been asked to take on this task as well, and I don't believe that we should be fearful of pursuing good public policy just because at the end of the day she may or may not veto. I think that we have a legislature that is that only meets for a certain period of time throughout the year, and we need to have our communities as engaged in this process as possible. And my hope is that with the issues that are directly impacting all of us equally, that we should all be just as bold and making sure that the governor hears what we're saying, and that the public policy that we're putting forth, that it's not only the right thing to do, but that she's willing to sign on to that as well.
But Representative, what would you say to a critic who would question the move not to go with a constitutional amendment if you know that it's simply going to be vetoed, it's not going to get passed?
Right. I mean, I completely understand that, and I think that with a constitutional amendment, it would take it directly to the voters. And as somebody who has organized in my community and has collected signatures and done the work within the community, doing the work through a level of what a constitutional amendment could provide is something that I would support. And at the same time, I know that that what's been proposed so far does not have that, and I understand from of various people that there's reasoning behind that as well.
Okay. You mentioned your work in Las Cruces to raise the minimum wage. That was that grassroots effort, getting signatures, putting it before the city council. We are at a moment in time now in the country where all around the nation, people are protesting various policies of the Trump administration. As someone who's been involved in a grassroots fight that was successful, what, in your view, will it take for the folks who are out there protesting to turn that protest into a movement that registers people to vote, that gets people to get politically active, maybe even like you, run for office, to talk to their legislators at all levels about what working families need? What will it take, in your view?
You know, I believe that it's been happening for several years now, and I think that this new administration has ignited something that I believe has been sort of growing already in terms of the work that we've done for immigration rights, for people with deferred action, the Dreamers who were able to push President Obama to sign an executive order to do that. I think over time we have been seeing it. It's just what's different now is that you're seeing different people who are participating, which is exciting. But I also want to be very clear that there's been so many of us who've been doing this work for so many years now. And we're just very excited that a new kind of people who are seeing how they're being directly impacted are now part of that movement. And yes, I encourage so many of my constituents down in the South, as well as people all over New Mexico, that we must continue to march, we must continue to demonstrate, we must continue to protest, and we also must be a part of the democratic process and making sure that not only are we talking to our legislators, talking to our lawmakers and our policymakers, but also understanding that we individually have the ability to put ourselves in positions of power and be at the table as well, and that was something that I had to take, that I had to finally do for myself. For example, is to finally decide to run for office, and so that might not be something that everybody is willing to do or can do, particularly in our legislature, that it's unpaid and that we own that it's not. Not everybody can do this. I certainly believe that there are opportunities and that this is the right time and this is the right moment to move forward with that.
As you know, there are several bills to empower more people in New Mexico to get involved in the democratic process through an open primary, allowing folks who aren't registered with a political party to vote in the primary. Where do you stand on this?
I support that. I think that for too long, our two parties have been able to mobilize their own communities, but there are several people. I mean, there's a number of people, particularly those in my district and throughout southern New Mexico, who are left out of the electoral process. And so I think that this is the right time to really include so many people with a variety of different ideas to be a part of a process that is so important to our democracy.
Have another question for you. There are a lot of bills out there looking at reforming ethics for the legislature. As part of ethics, I have a specific question for you. Should there be legislation, in your view, to look at a requirement of 2 years or more before state officials go to work for organizations that lobby the government? As you know, former New Mexico Environment Department leader Ryan Flynn, under Governor Martinez, left his job with the Environment Department and quickly became director of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association.
I definitely support legislation that would make it harder for that to happen. I think that there definitely is. There should be a time limit or a period of time where those who are involved in state government or in lawmaking to be able that they're not allowed to lobby their previous employer so soon after having left, and so I certainly support legislation.
Is 2 years enough? Do you think that would be a fair compromise, if you will? Some folks say 5 years. I mean, there are a lot of ideas out there on this, not just in New Mexico, but on the federal level as well.
I don't know. I honestly don't know how many years would be the right amount. But I do know that as a state who is seen as, we have probably, we're one of 6 states that does not provide an ethics commission for its legislative branch and its executive branch, and so. I know that that so much of why businesses and don't come into to our state sometimes to invest in our state is because there is this idea that perhaps our state is corrupt and that our government is corrupt, and so I don't know what the number of years should be, but I do know that we must begin to really think about what our ethics, what type of ethical laws what type of laws we pass in terms of making our state government and our legislature more ethical, because in the way that we're navigating right now and that we're operating from is not sustainable, and we must really consider looking at really looking at these laws that bring in more transparency and ethics.
Okay, Representative Angelica Rubio, thank you so much for joining us this week on Your Legislators.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And thank you at home for joining us as well. If you joined us late, we want to also remind you that we have invited Governor Susana Martinez to join us on this program, and we hope to have her on a future episode of the show, along with many more of Your Legislators. I'm Fred Martino.